215 people.
Wow.
Looks like you have to unmute yourself, Maravik.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. Welcome, everyone, to High Ridge House, to our monthly metaphysical talks. And welcome to the church that Mary Baker Eddy started, which is my virtual backdrop for today. I just want to make sure Leslie Pitts is on now with her camera, with her video. Leslie, are you on?
Yep, I'm on.
Wonderful. Okay. So the star of the show is on. Well, Leslie Pitts is the ideal speaker as we celebrate Mary Baker Eddy on Women's History Month this March. As the former manager of the church archives, later executive manager and president of the Mary Baker Eddy Library, she is the perfect person to talk about our dear leader. As it relates to Christian Science nursing, Leslie trained as a Christian Science nurse straight out of high school, working as a visiting nurse, private duty, and as a training school director, superintendent of nursing at Hawthorne House and Charlton Manor in the United Kingdom. I know we have a bunch of people from the UK with us today. She moved to the US to work for nursing activities at the Mother Church. And then she also became the manager of that department. The manager of that department is Bonnie Casterman, and she's also with us in the audience today. Leslie is joining us from her home in Plymouth, Massachusetts. She is currently a journalistic Christian Science practitioner. Please help me welcome Leslie Pitts.
Hi. Wow, so many friends I can see online. There's so many of you. I want to say hi to everyone. It's lovely to be able to be with you today on Zoom. And some of you know my background. As Maravik said, I was a Christian Science nurse for 30 years, and I still count myself as a Christian Science nurse. And that's why it's always a pleasure to give back to Christian Science nursing organizations in this way. And Christian Science nursing was a huge influence on my work at the Mary Baker Eddy Library. I was part of the team that prepared all the materials in the collections for opening in the library. And we planned how the library would operate and be managed. And when we talk about collections, that means letters and manuscripts, art and artifacts, photographs, and a lot of other materials. And it required from all of us the qualities of a midwife: patient waiting, hopefulness, and expectancy of the joy to come as there were moments of great challenge. Well, now that the collections have been properly categorized and opened, however the library chooses to operate, those collections will continue to be publicly available and accessible to you, the members of the church, and also to the public in a way that they never had before. I'm sure all of us that are here today will have different answers as to how Mary Baker Eddy's life inspires our progress. And perhaps for some of you, love and appreciation for Mrs. Eddy is just a beginning. I have to admit that growing up in the United Kingdom, I wasn't much interested in Mary Baker Eddy. I loved learning about the Bible, and I loved her book, Science and Health, with Key to the Scriptures, and I love how it explained the Bible. But why did I need to learn about an American woman? But of course, that's changed. Well, everything I'm going to share with you today about Mary Baker Eddy's life has a relevancy to what is happening in our own lives and to the issues we need to address in the world today. So what we learn about her life can inspire us and our prayers for the world. I don't have to go into how to pray about these issues, as Kate Dearborn did such a great job a few weeks ago when she talked to us on these metaphysical monthly meetings at High Ridge about daily defense. And I know her talk is still available on High Ridge House's website, so you can go there and listen to how she tells us how to daily pray for ourselves. And that will help with my talk too. Well, reading about history is important because it informs us of the progression of thought throughout a particular period of time and the lessons learned by the characters we read about in that history. It helps us to steer around the same problems that we might meet in our time. Mrs. Eddy tells us in retrospection and introspection, mere historic incidents and personal events are frivolous and of no moment unless they illustrate the ethics of truth. So looking back at Mrs. Eddy's life does teach us so much about the ethics of truth. Well, I've made a document of the references I'm going to give out today, and I'm sure Maravik will put those on the website for you. I'm going to speak about two areas that currently need our prayers. First, I'm going to speak about overcoming difficult circumstances and trauma that might be happening in our lives or in others around us. Second, I'm going to look at the cult of personality and how Mary Baker Eddy dealt with this herself and why a fine balance was needed between being out of the public eye as much as possible and the importance of the acknowledgement of her as discoverer and leader of the Christian Science movement. Well, let's begin at the beginning of her life and think about the many obstacles she encountered just to get to adulthood. I'm going to start by painting a picture of America and particularly the role of women. During the 17th and early 18th centuries, as families settled in the colony and then broke away from the crown to establish a nation, women worked hard alongside of men, and they were appreciated. They joined in the politics, and there was a certain equity, not legally, but every hand was needed to raise herds, plant crops, make clothes to wear, build shelters, and put food on the table. But as the country expanded and found its feet, women began to be separated from men by their role as wife and mother. Due to the establishment of manufacturing and commerce, men began to go out into business, into what was thought of as a separate and immoral world. Women were to be kept safe and pure at home, bringing up the next generation. Well, as you can imagine, life expectancy was also very different then. Most families during the early 19th century suffered the loss of an infant or a young child in the family. It was one of the reasons that spiritualism as a practice grew so quickly mid-century, as many mothers wanted to contact their dead children to know that they were all right, especially as the then religious teaching said they would be stuck in a state of limbo. Now, Mary Baker Eddy, as you know, was born into a farming family, the youngest of 6. And although her parents had established a good life, her brothers did not want to continue the farming life of their forebears, and they moved away as soon as they could. And her sisters, indeed married and began their own families. It was a home in which she was taught the Bible. She was able to go to school when well, and where she was constantly, it was a home where she was constantly aware of the increasing diverse theological discussions of the day. She was exposed to the brilliance of a brother destined for great things, who she observed and sometimes was able to benefit from his intellectual and educational achievements, and a home where she grew up with a deep passion for learning, especially reading and gathering knowledge. But there were the occasions of her ill health, and of course concern that she might not survive. There is no way of knowing or really a reason to dig into what she was suffering from. But just for a moment, imagine, if you can, growing up in an age where women were only expected to marry and raise a family. Now imagine how frustrated and held back you would feel if you were not allowed to read or sometimes go to school, and there was no outlet for your curiosity and intellectual energy. It was believed at the time that if a woman read too much, it would harm her womb and therefore her ability to bear children. She also wrote that her father thought that my brain was too large for my body, and so kept me much out of school. But I gained book knowledge with far less labor than is usually requisite. It was not expected that a woman would seek higher education or take a profession unless she remained unmarried, and then only writing and teaching were considered respectable professions to follow. Many women of this time period were often sick, and it's now believed that it was because they chafed against the restraints of the times that they lived in. What we now know of Mrs. Eddy's intellect and her abilities and her facility to reach beyond her circumstances are nothing short of inspirational. Now, one of the ways that Mrs. Eddy gathered information was to keep scrapbooks of newspaper articles that interested her. And these cover many different subjects. You can see she was interested in articles on the events and the history of the times, as well as innovations in science, biology, and chemistry. She also collected the obituaries of family members. She kept scrapbooks all through her life, and Calvin Fry particularly helped her keep the later ones. They go up to about 1913, so I think he continued a little bit after her death. She also kept copybooks, and in which she wrote poetry. She copied out things that she wanted to remember, and they were also used to practice handwriting. Now, the library has 2 of her copybooks, and now I'm going to start showing you some slides so you can start to discover these for yourself on the Mary Baker Eddy website. So I'm hoping that you can follow along with me as I go online now. So just bear with me for a moment. We're going to go online. There, you should see the library's homepage. So somebody tell me if you can't. And I'm going to
Yes, we can.
you can? Good, great. And I'm going to do a little annotation, get a little spotlight here so I can show you things on the website. Hide the panel here. That's it. Move this up. Right. So here we are on the home page, and you can go onto this yourself. you can't break anything. So don't worry, just find out things, click on things and look at them. You can see here a lot of different tabs that you could explore. For now, I'm just going to go to research and reference because this is where the most interesting things are for us today. First of all, you have Ask a Researcher. So if you ever have a question, please, I'm going to show you, they have a form here and you can fill it in with your question and send it in to them. And they will send you back an answer. And I did that this week and it only took a day. And I don't think it's because the person knew who I was. I think they just were able to answer it easily. So don't be afraid to do that. We're going to talk about Mrs. Eddy's papers later. There's a timeline of the biographies of Mrs. Eddy. And this is where we're going to go now, finding aids. Now, finding aids are guides that tell you what the library has in its collection. And you can see here, they have 3 areas. The Mary Baker Eddy collection, which is most of the things that belong to Mary Baker Eddy. The middle part is the special collections. They have historical files. And in there, it might be somebody might have done some research on a particular subject. And they'll put all the research together, whether it came from the library itself or from other archives or questions that they've answered and written a paper on. So that would become a subject file. And then they have photographs and art objects and other artifacts in the special collections there. And then on the right here, you see the organizational records of the First Church of Christ Scientists. Now, the Mother Church is an organization and it has records. All the board meetings that have ever been held are there. And a lot of other interesting information like the last plaza reorganization or the building committee minutes and photographs of how it was built. So it's very interesting to go in and see what the library has. We're going to go into the Mary Baker Eddy collection, and you can see here that they have a lot of different things. They have the articles, her articles that she was writing, manuscripts. This includes her copybooks. There's her book collection. There's her diaries. Correspondence that came to her as publisher of Science and Health. These are wonderful letters, people writing about the healings they've had, and then just asking for a copy of Science and Health. They hadn't even had a copy of Science and Health, but they'd been healing people. Mrs. Eddy's pamphlets and serial publications, scrapbooks, and I'm just going to show you the scrapbooks for a moment, because they do have a finding aid for that. And you can see it's an Excel spreadsheet and it tells you what's on every page of the scrapbook. And if I move it over a little bit, whoops, didn't mean to do that. Let me go back again. There we go. I'm going to move the pictures over here. On this side here, you can see, for instance, the verse on the opposite page marked with a star, my precious mother gave to my deceased husband to be opened when we were midway on our journey south. So she's keeping things from her early days of marriage. So very interesting early pieces that Mrs. Eddy saved. So it's worth really going into this website and having a look at what you can see there. I'm going to try and go back now. Whoops, not going where I want it to go. So now if we go up to the articles, which is at the top here, you can see it contains articles and other manuscript material written by Mary Baker Eddy, her secretaries and others who wrote on her behalf. And in here it says 2 copybooks of poems and other manuscript material. So this is where the copybooks are kept. So that's, I think, all I wanted to show you there for now. So I'm going to stop that share, and then I'm going to show you what the copybooks look like. So that's what they look like. They've got modern bindings on them. They're these two big fat books here, these two here. And this is what they actually look like inside. This is what the manuscript looks like. Can you imagine trying to transcribe that and write down what Mrs. Eddy says? And in a minute, I'm going to read you a verse of a poem, and it's right there at the top of the page. Let me get my little spotlight thing again here, so you can see it. Right here, there's Go Little Voyager. You can just make it out here. So I just wanted to share that with you so you've got some feeling of what these copybooks looked like. So there were no photocopiers in her day, no internet or electronic form of saving one's thoughts. She began to collect in her late teens, and you can find in the copybooks drafts of what she would submit for publication in newspapers and even for inclusion in the early issues of the Christian Science Journal. She continued to read and edit the items in her copybooks throughout her life, probably drawing on their content as late as 1910 for the book of her poems, which was published shortly before her passing. She kept those books with her all through her life, and that tells you how much they meant to her, as we know how many times she had to move herself and her belongings with her trunk from boarding house to boarding house. Now, here's one example of its content. In each of those copybooks, there are different verses of a poem that she penned when her child, George Washington Glover II, left the first time to live with the Cheneys. He was 6 years old at the time. Now, in retrospection and introspection, she says that he was 4, but you know how when you're writing something quickly, you sometimes forget how old your child was? Well, he was actually 6 when he left her to go to the Cheneys. Well, one of those verses ended up in retrospection and introspection, and you can read it on page 20. But the other one was never published. I'm going to read you the unpublished one. Go, little voyager, o'er life's rough sea, born in a tempest. Make his life more bright. O love divine his father ever be, thy word his compass, and steer him into light. Now she continued to cherish this poem in her own way, as there are edits that experts can tell have been done much later in her life. There are letters she wrote at that time and many actions later in her life when she was reunited with her son that show her deep love for him and the extreme pain that it caused her to be separated from him. As we think of other parents and children separated from each other, her moral courage inspires us that one can move on even under such incredible hardship. I could list the other challenges she faced, but you all know them. Today, somebody facing similar situations might be said to have suffered irreversible trauma. But her eventual discovery of a world more bright, as she describes it in her hymn, Christ, My Refuge, shows this is not inevitable. We know that Mary Baker Eddy writes of the allness of God's goodness and love for all his children. No one is ever left out of this circle of love. What about the ideas in this week's Bible lesson on true substance? If we see God as the shepherd, he watches over all of the flock and seeks them out. Not one sheep can be lost, even if he has 99 others to look after. He must find that sheep, as it's important and a necessary part of the flock. Even if we stray like the prodigal son, we're watched for and we're welcomed back without judgment. How can our past keep us from enjoying where we are now, the kingdom of heaven? Certainly not sin or sickness or the threat of death. When an exhibit about Mary Baker Eddy was displayed at the Philadelphia Free Library, we found that women of color particularly resonated with her story when they read about her son being separated from her. They wanted to know how she had overcome the grief of separation, and it drew them to want a copy of her book, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, to find out what she thought and how she developed her ideas. And I remember Gillian Gill, a biographer of Mary Baker Eddy, who's not a Christian Scientist, telling me that what showed her that Mary Baker Eddy was genuine was just looking at 2 portraits of her with some decades in between. Again, she was viewing these at an exhibit about Mary Baker Eddy. And here are the portraits that she was looking at. You can see on the left, you have Mary Patterson, about 1863. And on the right, you have Mary Baker Eddy in 1886, when she was president of the Massachusetts Metaphysical College. What a difference. And Gillian told me that it was viewing that second portrait, showing the authority that Mrs. Eddy had at that stage in her life, that showed her that something had changed radically in her life. Yes, we can find Mary Baker Eddy in her writings, as she told us to, but sometimes the bridge is Mary Baker Eddy herself. Her life experiences touch people, and then they lead them to her writings and her ideas. Whatever is overwhelming us, whether it's feeling isolated, remember the time she spent alone in North Groton, or sick, without finances, without family, remember how she went on reading, learning from adversity, leaning on God until she says, the falling apple led me to the discovery how to be well myself and how to make others so. In the light of the many problems that people are facing today, this is an inspirational life. Now we're going to move to a second part of Mrs. Eddy's life that particularly inspires me. From such humble beginnings, it is simply amazing that she was able to break the barriers she did in society to rise to the position that she's someone that the press, or should I say the paparazzi, both covered sensationally in their stories. And also they sought her out for her thoughts on the issues of the day. You can see her writing in popular magazines and newspapers of the time on the subject of war, politics, Christmas, the approaching new decade in 1900. And she was constantly correcting statements in the press about things they'd written about her and Christian Science. And by the time of her death in 1910, Mrs. Eddy was one of the most well-known women in the United States and probably beyond. In the Christian Science Sentinel in March 1909, the editor included a letter published in the New York Herald newspaper that had been asking who the top 10 greatest living Americans were. Well, from the letter, one assumes they published a list of 10 men. The author, identified only as HDE, says, "You seem to assume that the 10 greatest living Americans are mere male men. Herein, I differ with you." Then he or she lists 10 men and women and writes underneath, "I have selected these names for their distinguished greatness, for some great and good achievement, the memory of which will outlast the performance and gather luster with the years. I placed Mary Baker Eddy first in the list, for her accomplishment seems nothing short of miraculous. She threw down the gauge to the 3 sciences most inveterate in dogma and entrenched for centuries in the convictions of the human race." And it goes on. You can look it up yourself. I put that in the references for you. Had she sought out this kind of publicity? What was her daily life like? Did she carry it out with the intention of getting maximum coverage? No. Since 1889, she had done all she could to withdraw from public life. She was not a typical leader. She did not use her personality to become and remain famous and stay in the public spotlight. She understood clearly how important Christian character was. She writes, "This is my endeavor, to be a Christian, to assimilate the character and practice of the anointed, and no motive can cause a surrender of this effort." Unlike many leaders of new movements, she knew it was important for her to prioritize her time so that this fledgling group would prosper and be established on a solid footing. Without her withdrawal, whoops, we've got a little bit of noise there. Can we get rid of that?
Someone is on a phone. Could you please put yourself on mute by *6? Because we're not able to control it from our end. Or *6.
Okay, are we done? All right. Unlike many leaders of new movements, she knew it was important for her to prioritize her time so that this fledgling group would prosper and be established on a solid footing. Without her withdrawal to Concord, New Hampshire, and for the most part, the cessation of her healing and teaching practice, science and health would not be in the form it is today, and we would be without the provisions of the church manual. And it's hard to imagine that the church would have survived the assaults on its form of government and its leader. Probably all of us on this call today know her achievements and would echo HDE's comments. But the paradox is that so many people have never even heard her name. Yes, we often did surveys on the Christian Science Plaza right outside the Mother Church, and people would say they did not know who she was, even though they'd walked through the plaza for years. You remember I told you earlier that before I came to the United States to live, I had little interest in learning more about Mary Baker Eddy. Well, let me tell you the moment when the light went on for me. And it showed me that we needed to love and appreciate Mary Baker Eddy's contribution and be able to speak about it intelligently to others. I had gone to Seneca Falls, New York to discuss with the Women's Rights National Historical Park a proposed exhibit on Mary Baker Eddy. Besides the National Women's Hall of Fame in the same town, which then had a very small space to showcase its inductees, which did include Mary Baker Eddy, we were surprised to find no mention of Mary Baker Eddy in the larger museum space of the park. When the historians at the park said they did not know much about her, we were invited into their research library and began looking at the books on women's achievements, including college-level textbooks. In a particular volume called Women in Religion, we expected a full chapter on Mary Baker Eddy, but there were few references to her, and they were mostly in the footnotes. The historians showed us this, so we understood why they didn't consider her an important figure. We were shocked, and it came home to us how her story had been lost along with many other women who had made incredible contributions to the history of our collective progress. After talking with the staff at the museum, we were invited to put together a concept for an exhibit which would be displayed for 1 month in their special visiting exhibit space. But it actually stayed a lot longer because it was a huge success. And I'm going to show you an old picture of it here. Some of you will remember it, I'm sure, and perhaps even went to Seneca Falls to see it. But it was in the foyer of the new library just before the library opened. We had it there in the foyer of the Publishing Society. So you can see it had 3 sections: Mary Baker Eddy as a thinker, Mary Baker Eddy as a doer, and Mary Baker Eddy as a healer. So that's what it looked like. This is Woman's Hour is a quote from Mary Baker Eddy. However, our first concept for the exhibit was turned down because it was too insular and did not interest those who were not Christian Scientists. We learned a lot by listening to the park's historians. We read about other women of the same time period and the historical context of the time Mrs. Eddy lived in, including what was happening in society and culture, in religion, medicine, and how women were beginning to express themselves in public. Suddenly, I was able to see what a powerhouse she was and the ground that she covered in comparison to other women of the time. And I'm just going to give you one example. You all have heard of Harriet Beecher Stowe, who began publishing Uncle Tom's Cabin in serial form in 1850. And the full book was published in 1852. Here is the front cover of it in 1852. Now, Miss Stowe wanted to write about a serious subject, slavery. She was born into a family of famous preachers, the Beechers, and she felt so constrained by her position in society that she wrote the book in the form of a novel rather than a factual account of the inhumanity of slavery. However, she so cleverly wove the topical themes into the story and gave it a very high moral tone, placing the right words in the mouths of her characters, that it was immediately obvious to her readers what she was trying to voice. It became a bestseller shortly after its publication in 1852 and was often sold as a set with a New Testament. As a woman, she wrote a novel, not a factual account. It was a few more years before Mary Baker Eddy pushed aside such barriers when she published Science and Health. And you remember 1875, there it is. This is the frontispiece, very simple. Science and Health. Just imagine the impact of a woman writing a factual book like that. And she included ideas on science, theology, medicine that turned established theories upside down in a predominantly male preserve. There were very few women really speaking out on these issues. By the end of the century, not only had she published many more books, but she'd also remarkably founded a metaphysical college and a church, been ordained its pastor, set up the church's continued organization through legal documents, as well as establishing a publishing society with weekly, monthly, and quarterly publications, which still are published today. That's an amazing achievement. By the beginning of the 20th century, she commanded an audience of 12,000 of her followers outside her home in 1903. And that was covered by the leading newspapers of her time. The Boston Journal is one of them. There, Mrs. Eddy greets 12,000 Christian scientists, the most remarkable religious pilgrimage in the history of America. No one would call Mrs. Eddy a shrinking violet. She could be forceful, determined, and persistent, but it was done from the basis of listening to God and following through on what she heard. Ultimately, her way would be seen to be the right one, even when her students and so-called experts in law or organization thought differently. She knew her ability to listen to God had been honed over decades, and that no one else had prayed as earnestly and put in the effort as she had done. Her spiritual perception was sharp, and it was no wonder that she was often frustrated by the slowness of her students to grasp what they needed to be doing. But she was very patient with any student who showed the willingness to learn, and sometimes even with those who were not willing. What inspires me is her clear and deep thinking on this subject of personality over many years. On the one hand, she knew that she was a scribe under orders and not the leader of a worldwide movement in an authoritative sense. But on the other hand, she also understood why respect and correct information about its discoverer and founder was important for anyone to appreciate and accept the system of healing she had established. The student or the seeker must appreciate the discoverer. If we don't respect someone, it's hard to believe that anything they say or do has merit. She would write, "All people need in order to love and adopt Christian Science is the true sense of its founder. In proportion as they have it, will our cause advance." This shows the great importance she put on the right sense of herself as discoverer and founder of Christian Science, not on the human Mary Baker Eddy. In fact, as attacks on her increased from within and without the Christian Science movement, she found it necessary to include the provisions in the church manual for lecturers and committees on publication to safeguard how the public viewed her. And you remember the bylaw for Christian Science lecturers? She asks them to bear testimony to the facts pertaining to the life of the pastor emeritus. And for committee, she writes, "It shall be the duty of the Committee on Publication to correct in a Christian manner impositions on the public in regard to Christian Science, injustices done Mrs. Eddy, etc." It goes on a little bit longer. But it wasn't just the public that needed a clear sense of Mary Baker Eddy. It was her students too, and she placed in the manual a daily reminder. It shall be the duty of every member of this church to defend himself daily against aggressive mental suggestion, and not to be made to forget nor to neglect his duty to God, to his leader, and to mankind. How inspiring to see how each of us can sort through the beliefs attaching themselves to our human persona. And like Mrs. Eddy, we can listen for ways to drop these earth weights and go up higher in our understanding of our relationship with God and each other. We do this without losing our sense of worth. How could we? Each of us is important to our Father, Mother's plan. As she says, no person can take the individual place of the Virgin Mary. No person can compass or fulfill the individual mission of Jesus of Nazareth. No person can take the place of the author of Science and Health, the discoverer and founder of Christian Science. Each individual must fill his own niche in time and eternity. This is so important in today's climate of larger-than-life personalities on our world stage. There is much to read in her writings about personal contagion, deification of personality, etc. You will see no positive references in her writings to charisma, the synonyms of which are charm, presence, aura, personality, force of personality, animal magnetism, allure, glamour, among others, but plenty of references on character. In talking about the importance of daily prayer for ourselves, Mrs. Eddy reiterates the need to yield to divine love's touch, to love and do good to others, and to watch our words. She then writes, mortal mind presents phases of character which need close attention and examination. The human heart, like a feather bed, needs often to be stirred, sometimes roughly, and given a variety of turns, else it grows hard and uncomfortable whereon to repose. There is so much on this subject to take up in our prayers at the moment, so our country and the world can find strength in unity of purpose. Now, I hope this has given you a little nudge to crack open a biography on Mary Baker Eddy, perhaps one you haven't read before. And every biography covers Mrs. Eddy's life from a different perspective and in the author's own style of writing. You need to read them all to get the full picture of her life. For example, if you read Robert Peel's 3 volumes, you'll get a very full picture. It'll cover the whole of her life in a very scholarly way, but it is a very patriarchal view of history. That's how it was taught at Harvard University at that time. And then you could read Gillian Gill's biography of Mary Baker Eddy. She will give you the scholarly women's history approach from the 1990s. And that complements a little bit, supplements Peel to some degree. But she doesn't go into the radical concepts that Mrs. Eddy believed and shared. She had enough on her research plate to cover what she did in her 1 volume. And not being a Christian Scientist, that would have taken her a lot longer to grasp the concepts and be able to write about them. So if you want to look at those, you might want to read Stephen Gottschalk's book, Rolling Away the Stone, Mary Baker Eddy's Challenge to Materialism. If you want to focus on her healing work, then read Christian Healer. So those are 2 areas of Mrs. Eddy's life that I find particularly inspiring and that speak to my own individual progress. and to problems that we're finding out in the world that need our healing prayers. But and so that comes to the end of my remarks at this point. And now I was going to, if Maravik will allow me, just to go back to the website again and just show you one other area that's really exciting that could give you a lot more information about Mrs. Eddy that you've never read before. So I'm just going to do that, Maravik, if that's okay.
Of course.
Okay. So here we are going back to the website. And I'm going to get my little annotation tool out here so I can spotlight it. That's it. Right, and we're going to go to, I'm going back to here, the home page, and research and reference. And I'm going to go to the Mary Baker Eddy papers. There's a team at the library that are taking every single letter of Mary Baker Eddy's, that's 28,000 of them, and the incoming correspondence of Mrs. Eddy, which is a huge number of people that wrote to her, and they're transcribing every single piece. And I'm going to go into the site so that you can see what it looks like when they do that. Access the papers and you go inside. On the first page, you'll see the newest documents that they have been transcribing for you. So I'm just going to pick one that Mary Baker Eddy wrote to a student. Here's one. Now you can make the whole letter come up huge on your screen like that, and you can start to read Mrs. Eddy's own handwriting here and go through it yourself if you want to. It's very hard, but you do get used to reading Mrs. Eddy's handwriting as you try, you know, do it a little bit more and a little bit more. But the other things on this page, here's the transcript. And you can make this come up. You can actually close the manuscript so that you can see the transcript here. And here you've got all these blue links. So you'll have like a little biography of Mrs. Eddy, a little biography of Hannah Larmony that she's writing to. Here you'll have a manuscript description that it was handwritten by Mrs. Eddy on lined Massachusetts Metaphysical College stationery. Archival note that an archivist noted on this document, they set the date for it. And then in the letter itself, there'll be little blue links that will show you what Mrs. Eddy is referring to. If she speaks about a person like she does down here, Miss Brown, Miss Brown's, whoops, I messed that up. Miss Brown's info comes up. So it's just a wonderful area. And here on the left side, you can go to type and click that. And you can choose an article, an incoming correspondence, an inscribed book, a letter, notes, all these things that they've transcribed. And it tells you how many they've done. They haven't got very far. It's going to take years and years and years to get them all there. But every quarter they put up new ones so you can read through them. I'm going to just pick an order of service here. This is a sermon that Mrs. Eddy gave. And this wonderful thing is Mrs. Eddy's notes on the sermon itself, reading the hymn 166, reading scripture, Lord's Prayer, hymn 51, silent prayer, sermon, admission of church members, she means, admissions of church members. So amazing. And then here are all related articles. So for instance, this one, no, not that one. There's one here that has the actual order of service. I'm not sure which of these it is. Let me see. No, I can't find it. But anyway, it's one of these. And you'll see here, this is Mrs. Eddy writing her sermon out. So This is her sermon, Behold Israel After the Flesh, from 1 Corinthians 10:18. So amazing. And there's a transcript of that, and you could read her sermons. So I just wanted to share that with you so that you have it as a great tool to go and learn more about Mary Baker Eddy and make your own discoveries. Okay.
Wow. Thank you so much, Leslie. Thank you for making our dear leader come alive and bringing her to our offices, our living rooms, or even our bedrooms, wherever people are signed on. That is such a tender and presentation of such a remarkable woman who has impacted, I know, every single person on this talk, on this Zoom call. We now have an opportunity to have questions or make comments. There was a question earlier. Why was it changed? I believe it's from Ginny Nilsson from Christian Science Publishing Company. Why was it changed to Society?
I don't know that level of detail. I'm not a historian myself. And that's when you could write to the Ask a Researcher on the website, and I'm sure they would answer you very quickly with that question. But that's the kind of detail. I'm not really familiar with that. I'm like a nurse that kind of sorts out messes. And that's what I did at the library. I was a facilitator. I helped the experts be able to put everything together and organize it in the archives. So
Great.
I will answer if I can.
Thank you. Nancy Harrison from Chattanooga said to everyone, we are reading Mary Baker Eddy, Christian Healer, every Tuesday at 1:30 p.m. for half an hour, and all are welcome to join us. So check out their church and join them. There's always lots of opportunities. You have to unmute yourself if you'd like to make a comment, and you have the opportunity to do that right now.
I wanted to thank everybody involved for a wonderful dissertation on things that we need to know. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you for a wonderful talk.
Pleasure. So glad you could join us.
There's a comment from Smiley is the last name or the name. A practitioner had shared with me that I should always be reading a biography of Mrs. Eddy to get a fuller idea of her forward movement.
Very good. Yeah.
So there's some comments in the chat box, but feel free to just echo anything right now. We want to thank our sister facilities who join us today. We have people from all over the world. It's just wonderful to see Africa, UK, Switzerland,
Wonderful.
France, and of course, all over the US, Canada. I don't want to
Canada. Thank you very much to everyone who made
Pleasure.
it possible. Hello from Canada.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I believe the Congo is on. They just wrote a note.
Kwakira from Congo, Brazzaville.
It's wonderful to see you. Yeah.
Great.
I send you greetings from Tempe, Arizona. Leslie, that was wonderful.
Hi, Barbara.
Hi.
Nice to see you again.
Good to see you too.
Yeah.
Leslie, any suggestions for celebrating Mary Baker Eddy's 200th birthday?
Oh, yeah, that's a wonderful moment coming up. I think she would expect us all to just rededicate ourselves to her teachings and to heal more. That's all I know she cared about in those later years, was seeing that people understood her healing practice and were busy and active healing others. So I think that's how we can really celebrate her life.
Wonderful. Leslie, I wanted to thank you too. I had to leave for a little bit, but I think I've heard enough to, and I'll go back and for the replay. What I'm grateful for is sort of clarifying the interest in Mary Baker Eddy. Growing up a Christian Scientist, I was cautioned always not to deify her or to look to her personality, that it was the work and the demonstration that was important, not necessarily her. And yet there are these books that have come out, and she has her right place as an avant-garde of women who push the envelope, but in a very special way. I mean, it wasn't about herself. She did it because of something she believed in, and wanted to help and heal the world. So I'm grateful for some clarity on that, because I've always shied away from too much, and now I feel a little more permission to maybe investigate things. So thanks so much.
Leslie, there's a question from Rob and Brenda. I've always been interested in knowing what books Mrs. Eddy had in her library that informed her of the concepts she addressed. For example, what books did she read that related to the topic of metaphysics or Christian metaphysics? Is there a list somewhere of the titles and authors of those books?
Yes, there is. You see, that's what's so wonderful, that we were able to categorize all that and make lists of all the books that she had at Chestnut Hill when she passed. Of course, we don't know which one she read unless she marked it with her writing, which she often did write little things in her books. But let me just show you again on the website here. I'm going to go in and go back to here, to the finding aids here, and then to the Mary Baker Eddy collection. And you'll see Mary Baker Eddy book collection right there. And there's a sortable list and there's a finding aid. So you can go into those. Here's the finding aid, and it will go through every book that they found at Chestnut Hill when she passed on. Now, sometimes Calvin Fry's books got mixed up with hers, so we're not always certain which were hers and which weren't, but it is a list. But again, if you have the chance eventually to go to the library and be able to look at the copybooks, those were the earliest things that she collected, the scrapbooks and the copybooks. And she collected little newspaper articles on things. You can see her thought is always innovative. She's always looking for the new things that are happening in the world around her. And then as she got older and more into theological things, you'll see those as well. But there's a whole picture you can paint from just looking at these things in the library.
Leslie, I really loved how you became an organizational nurse and an obstetric nurse in birthing the library and the collection. That was just so marvelous to see what you have done in getting it all together from the beginning. So on behalf of all of us, thank you so much, because also today you brought a lot more instructive and informational resources for us to explore the Mary Baker Eddy website of the library. So thank you for that. Are there was a question regarding Leslie's citations and list of references. We will be posting them, that list, together with the recording of this talk on our website. It should be available sometime later this evening, if for sure tomorrow morning.
What is your website address so we could meet you?
Yeah, highridgehouse.org. And if you're not on our mailing list, you can sign up to be on our mailing list to receive invitations for all our events.
highridgehouse.com.
.org, O-R-G.
.org. Okay, thank you. Wonderful, thank you.
Great.
Going to have to pull out. That company.
From Marilyn Bradshaw, one of our trustees, she says, thank you, Leslie. It's always so inspiring to hear about our leader, and you shared many thought-provoking incidents, facts, and ideas today. It should spur us all to be better followers and strive to fulfill the healing mission she devoted her life to. Also, I'm more eager than ever to explore the library website. Thank you. And I believe Brian, I think this is Brian Blandford, perhaps from the UK. Thank you for this wonderful sharing and focus on our beloved leader. Ever grateful to be a follower of this remarkable woman in my continual, I guess it's journey or study. Oh, study and practice of Christian Science for all mankind. There's a question, is Eddy was a little inspired by Hindu teaching, actually in the first Science and Health she mentioned about. Leslie?
Well, there are not really. I mean, she was, you know, I mean, when you think of it as a universal truth, as Christian Science is a universal truth, you're going to find part of that in any of the religions of the world. And I'm sure that where she saw it in another religion, she would acknowledge it and see it as the truth of God. But no, she was cautious about connecting with other religions in that way. She had sometimes harsh words to say about them. So you can read more in her letters about that. She sometimes, I can't remember whether she particularly mentions Hindu religion, but anyway.
Thank you. I have a correction. The previous commenter was Brian Bettiger, the executive director of our sister facility, that was thanking you for the talk, from our sister facility, Wide Horizon in Colorado. Thank you, Brian. There are a couple of, maybe more than 2 Brians on the call. Okay, well, we've gone past the time, but we're more than happy. So thank you so much for filling us up, so to speak.
Okay.
And thank you all. And let's give her, Leslie, a big round of applause.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Fantastic.
Lovely to be with you.
For supporting this talk and supporting High Ridge House. Much love to everyone, and let's go forth. And as she said, do our healing work. Eddy would love us to keep doing.
Thank you so much.
Love to and blessings to all. I'll be ending the meeting now.